So we're very pleased to have here Daisy Christodoulou, author of our very successful book, 7 Myths About Education. Hi, Daisy.
Hi.
Can you tell me what inspired you to write 7 Myths About Education?
Yeah, sure. So when I was training as a teacher, and when I was teaching for the first time as well, I would keep coming across, I'd hear things that I felt were quite questionable and that I was a little bit sceptical about, but I assumed that if everyone was saying them, that they were backed up by so much authority that they must be true. And when I was teaching, I was sort of very busy and didn't really have time to investigate them. And then I took some time out of teaching and had time to sort of read around and try and find out more about these things. And I realised that far from having a body of evidence supporting them, that actually a lot of them were not backed up by any evidence, and that actually there was quite a lot of research to suggest that they weren't the best way to proceed. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, this is quite interesting. Maybe some other people in education will be interested in this. So I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm. Great. And could you briefly outline here what the thinking is behind the 7 myths that you mentioned in the book?
So I think all 7 of the myths I present, I think all of them have got sort of one basic idea at the root of them, which is that facts and understanding are opposed, and that facts won't help you to gain understanding, and actually may even prevent you from getting understanding. So I think that's a quite common idea. I think it's seen in a number of different manifestations. So the idea that you don't have to learn things nowadays because you can just look it up. That's one of the myths I identify. But it's seen in a whole range of different ways, and I think that is at the heart of it. And it's not true either. Actually facts and understanding are intertwined. They're bound up with each other. And it's not that facts are opposed to understanding, it's that facts enable understanding, facts enable true sort of skill and understanding and analysis and all the high level skills that we want our pupils to develop, but they depend on facts.
Mm-hmm. So the book has obviously created great debate within the education community. How would you like teachers and school leaders to reassess their teaching after reading 7 Myths About Education? And how can you realistically think that it can move towards a more fact-based curriculum?
So I think what I'd like sort of school leaders and even sort of policymakers as well to think about is to be a bit more open-minded perhaps about some activities which have previously been denigrated. So activities that get pupils practicing in the classroom or that have them listening to the teacher, to be maybe a little bit more open-minded about that. And maybe also to just look behind the research base of many popular things that are advocated by many people, to just try and look behind and research and think, look at what is backing that up. I think that would be a really good start. All the time when anyone asks me about this, I'm always convinced that this has to be a bottom-up effort. It has to be about teachers and school leaders sort of thinking about these things. So I would just say, to think about some of the things that we take for granted, to think them through, and to think if they really are the best way of pupils learning. And if that happens, I'm confident we can have some positive change.
So what can teachers actually do in the classroom to encourage a more fact-based curriculum?
So I think there's lots of really interesting resources out there. Particularly, I really like the Core Knowledge Foundation. They have lots of, they're an American organisation, but they have lots of great resources on their website, particularly for sort of primary, I think, as well, kindergarten to grade 8. So they have some fantastic things there. I also think there's lots of quite exciting online apps that you can use to help pupils learn new things. There's more and more of those, and I'm a big advocate of those kind of things. I think they can, really make learning really fun and make it a bit easier too. So I think there's lots of really interesting and new ways out there, and if you sort of look out there, the things are there.
And why do you think the direct instruction method of teaching has been considered to be quite a part of a right-wing education manifesto?
I'll be honest with you, I really don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I think you're right to say that it has been. But it's baffling to me why that's been the case, because direct instruction, sometimes I think it gets a reputation as being maybe authoritarian, but actually if you look at how it works, it's entirely based around high levels of interaction between the pupil and teacher, and real sort of high energy, and pupils always being involved and being mentally active all the time. So it's baffling to me why it's got that reputation. And it's also baffling because if you look at methods that are the most successful, direct instruction is, on all of these research studies, one of the most successful, particularly with disadvantaged pupils. So it's something that really, progressives all around should get behind, because it's so successful, particularly for disadvantaged pupils.
Could you tell us who have been your major influences and why?
So I think a real major influence was the American educationist E.D. Hirsch. So I read his works just before I was sort of starting to write my book, and they were really eye-opening. They just seemed to crystallise so much that I had suspicions about, but hadn't really fully developed my ideas. So I often say it was on first looking into Chapman's Homer moment when I read Hirsch for the first time. It really sort of opened my eyes to a lot of things that were so interesting. And then following on from that, I read Dan Willingham's book, Why Don't Students Like School? So he's actually based, I think, at the University of Virginia. He works with E.D. Hirsch, but his work is from a cognitive scientist perspective, and he's all about sort of how the mind works and how pupils learn, and develops on a lot of the themes in Hirsch's work too. And again, that was really interesting because I hadn't come across that perspective of that way of looking at teaching and learning before. And again, gave me so many new ideas and new insights. So I would say, probably those two have been the biggest influence on my work.
And finally, obviously your book has been very successful, and the media attention that comes with it. Has this been much of a surprise to you?
Yeah, it certainly has. I didn't think it would. It's quite a niche book if you think about it, and I didn't think it would have the readership or the impact that it has had. I'm particularly surprised that it's had such a readership beyond England, because it is a very English-specific book. Half the book are sort of quotations from Ofsted reports. So I really did think that beyond England it wouldn't have much of a readership. But what's been so interesting for me is the way that a lot of the trends that are happening here are clearly happening in other countries too. And I've had people from Ireland, from America, from Canada, from Australia, lots of English-speaking countries who've all got in touch and said similar things that are happening in their country. So even though it does depend very much, if you like, on an English quango, it's obviously had some resonance beyond these shores.